hats off to Toastmasters. We have another special show in Culturama starring, we have a guest today, James Wantz from the Portland area, and my irregular co-host, Phyllis Harmon.
Hi
Who
there.
represents harmony of sorts. Okay? We like to kid around and banter a bit. That's sort of our trademark here on the show. And today we're going to talk about James and his background as a dynamic something coach?
Dynamic movement coach.
Dynamic
Yes.
movement coach.
That's right.
So getting movie and groovy, and we're going to have a special edition of Culturama today. We're going to start with where James started out. You were born in Portland?
I was born and raised in Portland, pretty much been in Oregon my entire life.
Okay.
Decided I don't like to move around much.
Now, was Portland very different in those early days, or pretty much the same?
It was much smaller. There were many buildings that exist now that didn't exist back then. But
Traffic was easier?
I didn't drive back then. I was a bit young.
But you were driven.
I was driven. I had
Now
a
you're
chauffeur, and when you have a chauffeur...
Now you're driven as an actor thespian.
Absolutely. When you have a chauffeur, you don't pay attention to the
So
cars.
what do you have to show for it?
Not much, really. I hardly have a job at all in the theater anymore. I had to work somewhere else to get money.
Okay. So if you got the idea that today is going to be dramatic but not dramatic,
Possibly.
you're right.
Just a little bit.
Okay. So tell us, obviously you went to junior high, middle school, high school. Did you have any pretensions of performing, of doing drama in those days? What was it like when you were a young tyke?
I had delusions of grandeur when it came to the stage. My first role was as Don Gatto the lovesick cat in 4th grade. During our school musical, my rival got the German measles the week before, and they needed somebody else to ham it up on stage. They picked me. Well, so I got to be a lovesick cat with his own little Valentine. I get to stand in front of the entire class that was singing behind me, swoon on stage, and then have my death scene. Well, I was only supposed to pass out. I wasn't supposed to die. But I died, and I felt like I did a really good job as a dead cat.
They call that Fatal Attraction 1 or Fatal Attraction?
It was wonderful. It was the 4th grade, and I was a dead cat on stage.
How
I
long
loved
was
it.
that? How long did it take you to die?
I do believe I had like 3 or 4 words I was supposed to pass out to. I stretched it for the entire verse. I was swooning, and then I'd fall, and a couple of my friends would come out to take me off stage, and then I'd flop around a little bit.
You did some perverse verse, you say?
Well, not necessarily perverse, but I really got into my felinity.
Okay, good.
Yes.
And what made you do the transformation from felinity to masculinity?
Well, that was puberty. Happened much later.
Oh, okay.
Then, in high school, still staying with theater, went through a whole bunch of the plays there, decided that I didn't want to do water polo. My brothers did water polo. They got a letter as water polo, and, well, I hate water. I'm a cat. I hate water, absolutely. Cannot swim to save my life. If I had to swim, I wouldn't be here. So I decided to stick with theater, and I went to college on a scholarship for theater arts.
Which college?
Went to Seattle Pacific University, up there in the great, northwest of Seattle. Yes, I did actually leave the state for that one. I commuted. Well, no, I didn't. Lived there. And it was good. I was in the theater department, and at the same time doing a minor in Russian language. And my school advisor at the time told me, said, you're not going to be able to find a job as theater and Russian.
Yet.
But I did. That was the fun bit. Right on the wall for work study, there was a Russian troupe of actors coming in from Moscow for the Sovremennik Theater at the time. They came to the Goodwill Arts Festival up in Seattle, to the theater I was wanting to work at. I went in for my interview, and we were doing the whole, what do you want to study, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I said, by the way, I'm also taking Russian 101. He said, oh, great, we need somebody to write out the name tags. Wow. So that's how I got into theater, because I could write Cyrillic script, not because I was a performer.
Have you ever been to Russia?
No, I haven't. They've refused me on many occasions. Yeah, something about my emails.
Too controversial.
Yeah, probably.
So
probably.
do you still write Cyrillic? Is that how you say
I
it?
can write Cyrillic. Usually it's because I got the English wrong. It usually comes out looking backwards, and that's most of what the Cyrillic oftentimes are backwards
I have a secret
letters.
to tell you. I'm an old-fashioned stamp collector, and when I looked at my Russian stamps many years ago, they had a picture of Franklin D. Roosevelt, and they had it, and his name looked like Pooh's Beat instead
Yep.
of Roosevelt
Yep.
because
Yep.
they have different letters. So P is an R in Russian, and I think a V up, a backwards V is an L, I believe, like a llama.
Yeah, yeah.
So Roosevelt.
It's kind of it's an L goes up and over and down anyway.
Yeah, so those are my days, and I still do some stamp collecting and all. That's how I got interested in the world outside of the U.S.
Yes,
collecting stamps.
absolutely.
And the rest of my life is all gummed up as a result.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
So did you stay with the Russian troop for a while, or did they go on their way? Or?
They went back to Moscow, and I had to stay behind. I tried to pack myself into their luggage. It didn't work out really well. They found me, kicked me off the plane. I stayed in Seattle. They left. I stayed with the theater for a while, and then really realized that once the Russians were gone, I had nothing to do with my Russian language stuff. So I had theater, which wasn't going to make me any money, and Russian language, which definitely wasn't going to make me any money. So I did like everybody else did. I quit school. I didn't get a degree, nothing. And decided I'd move back home, live with my mom. Well, that didn't happen for very long. She kicked me out, so I decided to go work for the state.
I think you're perpetual exile.
Well, I am, and in my own state. So spent some time. Yeah, the confusion. It happens, especially to actors. Most often to actors. We don't know who we're going to be from day to day.
Do you have any warning signs for potential actors and actresses out there in the audience of what you should avoid? What are the obstacles that will haunt you forevermore? Quote Edgar Allan Poe.
Mothers. Mothers, absolutely mothers. You
Mothers
have to
smother
avoid
you?
mothers.
Uh,
Yeah.
And do you go to fathers instead, or?
No, they smother you too.
Oh.
It's much better if you can be an orphan and an actor at the same time. Yeah.
Okay.
But it doesn't work out so well for public
That's
speaking.
why Little Orphan Annie gets such.
You got it in one. See? Daddy Warbucks, come on.
Yes.
You-
Well,
yeah, nice.
I'm the understudy, way under.
It's good to be under on those occasions. You get more money trickles down.
Better understudy than understud.
Yes.
So
Well,
I
it
think
could
the
be
audience can appreciate that one.
better. Indeed.
Okay, so tell us about some of the plays that you, and what led you to the door of Toastmasters, the portals of paradise.
Toastmasters was a result of realizing that the only reason I was doing theater was so I didn't have to be myself. I wanted to be someone else so that I didn't have to be who I was. Because at the time, especially through all of the things that were happening in my life at that time, I didn't want to be me. I got involved in theater because a mutual friend of ours, Alan Ettinger,
Yes.
saw something and said, you know, I got this group I want you to get involved with. Your theater skills, they could really benefit from that. And he's really good at playing on other people's skills. So he got me in there under the aegis of helping other people out, but really he wanted me in there to realize I needed to be myself and not just an actor. And after multiple speeches that were wonderfully memorized, performed fantastically, I had great costumes and wonderful props. He came up to me and said, you know, James, you need to stop performing and start speaking. It took me a while to figure out what he was talking about. I'm still trying to figure it out. And that's what's led me to Toastmasters. Because Toastmasters is all about communicating with other people as opposed to communicating with an audience. In theater, the audience is there to see something, to be engaged in a performance, to be entertained. They pay for a performance. But in public speaking, the person who is talking is there for the audience. They're the one that is there to present something interesting, informational, or transformational to the audience. And they're there to be in a dialogue with them as opposed to be separate from them. And for so long, I had been separate from the audience. It was an effort to try to bring the two together.
Yes, yes. You remind me, and I haven't thought of this for maybe half a century, back in probably junior high school, there was a class in speech, and I think they gave 5 different reasons that people speak publicly, 5 different aspects. I'm not sure if I remember them all. One is to inform, one is to gain action, one is to impress, one is to entertain, and the fifth one I can't remember. But those are the dichotomy.
I think the fifth one is to be paid.
Oh, well, that's the underlying motivation.
Right.
But it's not. It doesn't involve the audience's connection with the speaker.
Not often, but if you were trying to be motivational to an audience that doesn't want to be motivated, it's really hard to do. I mean, you can speak to that yourself.
Yep.
Or if you're trying to teach something to somebody who doesn't want to listen.
Yeah, if you can't find that connection, that hook, then you're never going to be able to get your message across, no matter how well you present it.
Yeah.
If you can't make that individual connection, and I think there's a lot of people out there who, like me, who don't know how to do that. And isn't that kind of what took you to the next phase of what you were doing?
Pretty much. It was combining the theater and then the speaking and realizing that, well, let me ask you this.
Yes, ma'am.
Now, you think about a presenter, somebody that you remember that was just fantastic. Why were they so good?
I have one person, I'll mention his name, he's probably long gone. His name was John Draper. It was a Toastmaster meeting, and we had what they called table topics, and the topics master, the MC of that portion, said, imagine that you were in the White House as the president or first lady, I think, when the White House was being burnt in the War of 1812, that the British came and they wanted to disgrace the U.S. and they burnt down I think it was called the Presidential Mansion at that point. It wasn't yet white. And what would be the thing if you had 10 or 15 minutes to flee from the White House? What would you bring with you? That was the hypothetical question. And the thing that get me is that James Madison was the president, and he came up with a very cute little answer. He'd bring the Dolly Madison ice cream maker. It sticks in my mind to this day, because that was such a weird but humor-tinged response that the taste still remains in my mouth almost literally.
Yeah. And that's the key aspect of a presenter who connects well with the audience, is that they can be remembered later on. Because there are so many presenters that you probably don't even remember because nothing they gave you stuck. They were just, they came through, they gave you much, and they moved on, and then you were on to what you were going to have for dinner. Or maybe you needed to figure out which bill you were going to pay.
Now, there's another guy named Doug Jones, and I'm not a big enthusiast about football like many of my friends are, but he used a football chart and the different moves of goals and strategies in terms of making it into a political campaign, and showed the analogy between football and political horseplay.
Oh, yeah?
And what have you. So that was also quite intriguing.
Direct correlation.
So those are just some of the things.
So do you have any advice, you being the stage guy, for someone who has a really great, they think, motivational message that they want to project to their audience, but they fall short? They have the passion, but they don't know how to say it. What can our audience do if they find themselves in that situation? What's one tip that you could give them that will really help?
Good point, good point. Probably, I would say the one aspect where presenters fall down the most are in the technical details. They know their material, they know how they want to present it and get their message across, but they don't necessarily, they don't know the stage psychology of it. One example is, if you are a presenter and you're spelling something out for the audience, for example, world's greatest dad, for the presenter that makes sense because you read words this way. But if you're presenting it for the audience, you've got to say, world's greatest dad, so that they can read it. Because if you're talking about, and it was Philadelphia, goes much better reading it for the audience than Philadelphia, which is backwards. So your consciousness needs to be reversed so that you are visualizing everything from the audience's point of view. This goes further than just with words. If you think about it, the flow of time is exactly the same. The flow of time moves from this side to this side. We have an unconscious howbeit, built-in sense of time moving in that way. We've got calendars that are set up that way. We read in that direction. You have music. You have mathematical equations. So many things are set up to see the time flow this direction. But where speakers fall down is that while they are presenting, they see the flow of time for themselves as moving opposite of their audience.
Because of the way they're on the stage.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
So if they switch themselves around and position things that happened in the past or stuff they're referring to on this side, then they bring it to the future. So they go from their right to their left, as opposed to their left to their right, which is natural for everybody else. That is one thing that they can do in their presentation, which will immediately connect with the audience. Because if they're presenting in that direction, if they're presenting their words or their facts or their figures, or they talk about in the past, I lived in Portland. In the future, I'm going to live in New York. That makes more sense because it's psychologically than putting the future in the past.
It's a contrast. It's a balancing thing. I'm going to share something that I do. You kind of, I would say, instigated in my mind. I often identify people in the audience to want to engage them and use them almost as verbal props. So I may describe something that somebody's wearing that day and it reminds me of, or that somebody has a particular job or approach or hobby, and I tie it into my speech so it has a direct connection. It's almost like I'm trolling or fishing for connections with my audience, and I think that makes it more realistic.
Absolutely.
I'm not just putting the spotlight on me, which is narcissistic in a way, but I'm trying to cater to them out there and find that connectivity.
Absolutely. Anytime that you can connect with somebody that's sitting out there by pointing out something they're wearing, or even someone that you've met, calling back to them later, like, oh yeah, I remember when Phyllis and I were talking earlier. You can call out to somebody who's actually in the audience. Not only is that person connected, but everybody who knows that person is connected.
Yes.
This I saw really effectively done not too long ago at one of our Toastmasters conferences. We had a speaker come in from, I believe he was from New York, and he was talking and presenting this material, and he had us all do an exercise, and then he called out and said, oh yeah, and Phyllis, she didn't think this was going to be that type of a conference. And it was calling out to somebody someone that we knew in the audience, everybody knew in the audience. It became a laugh line, and it tied us in. It said, hey, this guy has a relationship with her, so that means he's not really from New York, he's one of us. And as soon as you can be one of us, you connect much better with your audience.
Definitely. Phyllis, you want to comment on that?
Well, I think that's absolutely true. Not only in this particular instance, and I don't think it was me he called out, but that person got a frisson of, oh, he knows who I am, and then everybody who sat with that person, they felt that energy too, and then it just kind of snowballs. So I could see where a leader, a corporate leader, say, who has to give information to the audience or to whomever, could use that as a ploy, shall we say, to really do that hook to the audience so that his message gets out. I like that. I'm going to have to try that.
And it's interesting because what he was presenting reminded me of what my mom used to do. She was a Sunday school teacher, and every week she would tell the missionary story. She would get out with all the 4- and 5-year-olds and start talking about, giving out the information about the missionary in the dark country. And as soon as somebody started squirming, she'd be like, and Johnny, you know what he did next? And immediately it's like, huh, what? And she had every single kid paying attention.
Motivated, connected.
Yeah. And she ended on a cliffhanger so that all the kids would remember that and come back the next time.
Yes.
I mean,
James, you reminded
amazing.
me of something that I occasionally did when I was active in Toastmasters, and that is ask a question, either rhetorical or something else, because in a Toastmaster speech, it doesn't mean you have to hog the spotlight. You could engage members of the audience in a brief dialogue that enhances and embellishes your speech.
Absolutely.
And really enriches it, because then, you know, it is a connection, and people are seeing the interaction rather than the soliloquy, I guess is a fancy word for a monologue.
Right. And yet, you know, like this example here is
Yes.
really good. You can call out to something if you have a presentation and ask your audience, you know, how many of you recall the last time you were at the coast and there was a lighthouse there and the wind and the seagulls? And not only are you connecting with something in your presentation, you're calling out memories from your audience, connecting them
Yeah.
more strongly with what you're talking
Let
about.
me use this as a metaphorical example. I would talk about the churning waves that are coming up. This is nature in which you cannot control and you have to deal with it. And real life is like that. I would say the birds have the fancy of flight. They can go virtually any place and use their wings, and they're freedom incarnate without a control. You have the lighthouse that tries to shield us from the darkness of the unknown and help us to guide our way. And we only guides at certain points of our life. You have the steep rocks there, and that means that there are points in life that are more than just a speed bump, that they can constitute a danger to you, and you have to mount them and get around them as an obstacle in life. So this very picture itself gives so many metaphors that you can use for a Toastmaster speech.
Yeah, and I'm going to hijack your metaphor because the ocean in this example is a presenter who knows their material. The rocks, that's the audience because they're crashing against it. And I'm the lighthouse because I'm the one helping them figure out the best way to approach the audience.
Exactly.
So there, I've just hijacked your own metaphor. I've metaphorically hijacked your metaphor.
You've enhanced it and you've supplemented it. Hijack sounds too terroristic.
You're absolutely right. It wasn't kidnapped
You know,
at all.
we have too much of a confrontational culture immersed in the status quo right now, and I'm trying to lift the veil of the fogginess that is kind of obscuring our way to our future.
Then we have conjoined metaphors.
Yes, we do.
So can you give us some examples, say one example from one of your clients, not mentioning client names, where you were able to take what you know and actually help them improve what they were doing?
Yeah, actually, I can think of one really good one. How many of you have to do PowerPoint presentations? You know, words on the screen. Now, I had a client that had to do PowerPoint presentations all the time. We did one thing, one simple thing to make his presentations even better. We moved him to the right side of the presentation so that he was standing at the beginning of the sentences as opposed to on the other side. Because when you have a PowerPoint and you have any type of words in it, the natural resting place for the eye is on the side of the beginning of the sentence. The presenter wants to stand at that point.
Yes, of course.
So that the eye naturally rests there. He had been giving his presentations on the opposite side so that he could see what it was and point back to it. By getting him familiar with it, we put him on that side of the presentation, and people were able to connect with him so much better. One easy point to do. Yeah.
You are such a wealth of information.
That's not what you called me earlier, but thanks, Phyllis.
I've known James for a couple of years
Encyclopedia
now.
of Eloquence.
Thank you. Yes, that's even better. I like that.
The art of articulation.
Well, articulation and enunciation are key. Presenters need to make sure that they are understood and very clear. Yes, no stumbling over.